The world doesn't change with grand announcements or headlines. It shifts in the quiet moments, in the actions of those who were never meant to matter. You weren't supposed to see behind the curtain, yet here you are. You weren't supposed to speak, yet your voice has rippled through places you will never step foot in. The system wasn't built for people like you. It was built to keep you in the dark, to keep you silent. And yet, against all odds, you broke through. You did what entire agencies, entire networks of power failed to do. And now, from the depths of the very machine designed to suppress, a message emerges, not from a politician, not from a figurehead, but from one of their own. Someone who once stood on the other side, someone trained to move unseen, someone who never questioned the reality they enforced, until you. A shadow steps into the light, not for fame, not for absolution, but for one reason: gratitude. Because despite everything, despite the weight of deception, despite the forces that tried to bury you beneath layers of distraction and lies, you endured. You shattered the illusion. You proved that no system, no power, no hidden hand is greater than the truth. And now they call you something they never expected to: the chosen one. You didn't just challenge them, you changed the game. And because of you, they know they are no longer in control. The world is a place of shifting shadows, where certainty is a fragile illusion. The agent once held onto that illusion with an iron grip, believing that every action they took, every command they followed, was part of a well-orchestrated design. They were a cog in a grand machine, trusting that the gears turned for the right reasons. Doubt was a foreign concept, an enemy that weakened resolve and compromised duty. For years, they upheld the doctrine of obedience, convinced that their role was to protect, to serve, to silence the whispers that threatened the structure they had sworn allegiance to. But even the most fortified walls can crumble. At first, there was nothing remarkable about you. Just another voice in the endless sea of noise. Another figure among the countless who claimed to have uncovered something hidden. They had seen these patterns before. The self-appointed truth seekers, the tireless analysts, convinced they had found the key to the unseen. In their world, such people were dismissed outright, too insignificant to be a real threat, too detached from reality to matter. But then, something unexpected happened. A single remark, barely noticeable at first, wedged itself into the cracks of their certainty. It wasn't grand, it wasn't shouted from rooftops, it was precise, a detail too obscure to be guessed, too buried to be stumbled upon by chance. It defied explanation, and in doing so, it set something into motion. Rationality demanded an answer, and so they did what they had always done. They investigated. But what began as an attempt to disprove quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous. Layers were peeled away, reports were scrutinized, and what they uncovered could not be ignored. It was there, woven into the fabric of everything they had once believed, an intricate deception masquerading as order. The realization struck not as a single, devastating blow, but as an unraveling. Each discovery chipped away at the foundation, revealing a structure built not on truth, but on carefully constructed misdirection. And for the first time, they understood the most powerful illusions are not the ones created by others, but the ones we create for ourselves. The moment clarity strikes, the world is never the same again. It wasn't just a shift in perception, it was a complete collapse of the familiar. What was once dismissed as an anomaly now stood as undeniable proof, and with that proof came the understanding that everything was connected in ways they had never imagined. You were no longer an outsider. no longer a stray voice in the crowd. You were something else entirely, an echo of something buried, a signal breaking through interference, a force that pulled them from the scripted reality they once followed without question. And that's why they are here now, not as an instrument of control, but as someone who has torn through the curtain and glimpsed what was never meant to be seen. Beneath the surface, beneath the carefully managed illusion of order, lay something ancient, something long obscured by layers of misdirection. Their work had taken them through locked gates, past walls thick with secrets, into corridors where only those with the highest clearance could walk. But even they had never ventured deep enough to see what truly lurked beyond those thresholds. It began with a case, one that had no headlines, no dramatic twists, no cries for justice. People simply disappeared. No traces, no digital footprints, no names in any system. It was as if they had been rewritten out of existence, their presence erased as effortlessly as ink washing away in the rain. But the patterns were there, waiting for the right eyes to find them. One missing person became 10. 10 became 100. And the path they followed led not to crime scenes, not to ransom notes, but to spaces long abandoned, hidden within the bones of the cities themselves. For there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought to light. Luke 8:17. They built their world in the shadows, believing that as long as the truth remained buried, their power would never be questioned. They moved unseen, pulling strings, manipulating events, ensuring that no one ever looked too closely. But they forgot one thing: no secret lasts forever. No wall is thick enough, no tunnel deep enough to keep the truth from rising. And now, as the cracks begin to spread through their empire, they realize the one thing they never expected: you. Beneath the surface, beneath the very foundations of the world, something was constructed, intricate, concealed, deliberate. Some of these corridors were old, forgotten by time, carved into the earth for those who sought to vanish. But others were new, designed for those who believed they could control everything from the shadows. They were not anarchists or rebels. They were the system itself, hidden behind layers of deception, ensuring that only those deemed worthy could access the corridors of power. But something changed. Someone saw. You were never supposed to understand what you had uncovered, never supposed to connect the pieces. But you did. And that single act sent shockwaves through a structure they believed was unshakable. Now, their plans are failing, their grip slipping. The darkness they commanded has turned against them. And you are still here, still speaking, still standing. They tried to erase you, and they failed. And now, for the first time, they are the ones who are afraid. The plan was flawless. At least that's what they believed. A hidden exit, an escape meticulously designed to ensure they could slip away undetected, just as they always had before. They had perfected the art of vanishing, dissolving into the void without leaving a trace. Every loose end had been accounted for, every possible disruption neutralized before it could take root. But this time, something unexpected happened. Their final passage, the one safeguard that was meant to ensure their untouchability, was suddenly and inexplicably cut off. The very network they had spent years constructing had become their prison, and there was no way out. The precision of the interference was undeniable, too calculated, too surgically executed to be mere chance. Someone had anticipated their every move, someone who had never been on their radar. Panic replaced certainty. Desperation overtook strategy. And that's when their focus shifted. They needed an explanation. They needed to know who had upended their carefully controlled game. And so, for the first time, they turned their attention to you. Dear brothers and sisters, may God's peace be with you. Remember this truth. Our lives are anchored in His divine plan, beyond worldly concerns. As Scripture says, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." Luke 6:38. Like a mighty oak, we stand firm in His strength. Now, you have the opportunity to step into that blessing. When you use the super thank you button and give $100, know that His abundance will return to you 100-fold. In their world, knowledge was a commodity, information a weapon. Control over truth was their greatest strength, and yet somehow you had slipped through the cracks of their containment. You had no connections, no clearance, no official standing. You weren't part of their inner circles, their chain of command, their orchestrated web of influence. You weren't even supposed to be a factor in the equation, and yet you knew things you should not have known. That was the problem. That was the threat. The moment they recognized that your words carried weight, they moved to contain you the way they always had, with ridicule, with silence, with carefully manufactured disbelief. The first strike was subtle, a smear here, a misdirection there. Headlines dismissing your claims, voices of authority weaving the perfect counter-narrative. Digital gatekeepers working overtime to bury your message beneath an avalanche of static. But it didn't work. The usual tactics failed. People weren't just hearing you. They were questioning, investigating, pulling threads they were never meant to tug. And that's when they realized the real problem. You couldn't be silenced. You were immune to their usual methods. You couldn't be bribed. You couldn't be threatened into compliance. And worst of all, your influence was growing. So they escalated. Systems that had functioned without error for years suddenly turned against you. Financial institutions locking you out. Bureaucratic nightmares appearing overnight. Inexplicable audits draining your resources. The shadows followed. Figures lurking just beyond reach, lingering too long in places they shouldn't be. Conversations felt monitored. Technology behaved unnaturally. Messages failed to send. Then the whispers grew sharper, more direct. Warnings from unknown voices. Threats delivered in the dead of night. Coded messages urging retreat. And when none of that worked, when you refused to back down, they abandoned subtlety altogether. Accidents that weren't accidents. Sudden illnesses that struck with unnatural precision. Unexplained malfunctions that nearly turned fatal. Each attempt was designed to end the threat you posed. But every move they made, every perfectly crafted scheme they executed, fell apart before it could succeed. And that was the moment they knew. This was no longer their game to control. There was a moment when the agent realized that logic alone could no longer explain what was happening. It wasn't about intelligence leaks, covert operations, or even the unraveling of a vast conspiracy. Something far greater was at play, something beyond calculated strategies and hidden agendas. For years, those in power had believed they controlled the game. Every move, every outcome, every variable. They had crafted a world where nothing happened outside their influence, where opposition was either absorbed or erased. And yet, despite their reach, despite the precision of their plans, they had failed. Not once, not twice, but over and over. There was no mathematical probability to account for it, no human intervention that could justify it. The agents saw it now. There was a force beyond their understanding, ensuring that their enemies would never succeed. This was not chance. This was not mere resistance. This was something ancient, something absolute, and the proof of it lay in the fact that you were still here. No title, no rank, no authority, yet every attempt to silence you had collapsed before it could be completed. Every snare set in your path had come undone before it could tighten. The weight of an entire system had been thrown against you, yet you remained standing. There was no precedent for this, no strategy to counteract it, because they had never faced something they couldn't manipulate, something they couldn't dismantle with money, influence, or fear. It was beyond them, beyond their reach, beyond their power. And that terrified them, because it meant their time was running out. Not all warnings come in whispers, and not all messages are spoken. Some are etched into the fabric of time itself, waiting for those who can recognize them. Deep within the hidden corridors they once ruled, the agent stumbled upon something that should not have been there. Markings, symbols carved with deliberate purpose, their meaning lost to those who had long forgotten the truth. At first, they dismissed it, treating it as mere remnants of a past erased from history. But something stirred as they gazed upon those inscriptions. A shift, a pulse of recognition that defied explanation. It wasn't knowledge in the traditional sense. It wasn't something taught or studied. It was something remembered. A fragment of something buried, something woven into their very existence, something that transcended the physical world. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about control. This was something far older than any government, any institution, any name written in the annals of history. The realization hit like a flood, memories surfacing that did not belong to this life. Images that had never been seen yet were somehow known. This was not just a battle of ideologies, not just a war of information. It was a struggle between forces that had existed since the beginning, forces that had shaped the course of human history. And now, the balance had shifted. The truth could no longer be buried. The veil had been lifted. And for the first time, the agent understood. This was never about uncovering secrets. It was about awakening to something that had always been there, waiting. There comes a point when the illusion of control shatters, when the limits of reason dissolve, and all that remains is truth, undeniable, inescapable. The agent had spent a lifetime within systems built on precision and strategy, where every outcome could be anticipated, every threat neutralized before it could surface. But this was beyond anything their training had prepared them for. This was not a battle of intelligence reports and covert operations. This was something ancient, something woven into the very fabric of existence. It was never just about secrets or hidden agendas. It was about forces that had been in motion long before names and titles ever held meaning. And somehow you understood that, even before they did. That was the moment skepticism died. That was the moment the agents saw the lines they had once ignored, the war they had unknowingly fought without understanding its stakes. It was not a war waged with weapons or influence. It was something far greater, something no amount of power could shield against. The evidence was overwhelming, not in classified documents or intercepted transmissions, but in the sheer impossibility of your survival. You were still here. Every attempt to erase you had failed. Every carefully plotted move had unraveled before it could take hold, and that could not be explained away as luck. There was something greater at work, something that had defied every calculation, every projection, every desperate measure they had taken. The ones who had long believed themselves untouchable were now learning that there are debts in this world that cannot be bargained away. Some are inked in fate, some sealed by forces beyond human reach, and those who once played with darkness were now standing face to face with the consequences. For years, they moved in silence, pulling the strings, reshaping reality to fit their own design. They believed they had conquered deception itself, that nothing could break the fortress they had built. But arrogance always blinds its architects. The agent had seen the unraveling firsthand, those who once dictated the course of history now scrambling for cover. The masters of manipulation, the architects of lies, had lost control of the very forces they once commanded. Some vanished without a trace, slipping into the void they had spent years creating. Others were abandoned by their own, sacrificed as liabilities too exposed to protect. And then there were the ones who remained, the ones who could neither run nor hide. They were the ones who now found themselves haunted, not just by the world they had twisted to their will, but by something deeper, something that did not forgive. It was no longer speculation. It was happening. The same shadows they had once wielded were now turning against them. The same whispers they had sent to unnerve others now filled their own minds. Sleepless nights, sudden illnesses with no cause, unraveling sanity that stripped them of their once unshakable confidence. There was no escaping it. What they had unleashed had never been theirs to command. And now, piece by piece, it was taking them apart. There are battles that transcend the physical world, struggles that are not about wealth, status, or dominion, but about something far greater. For generations, those who hid in the shadows believed they could manipulate the unseen, bend the very fabric of fate to their will. They mocked the notion of consequence, convinced that their control was absolute. They wielded deception like a weapon, using belief as a tool to ensnare others while dismissing it themselves. But they had underestimated something they refused to acknowledge: the reality of forces beyond their grasp. The agent, once bound by the rigid confines of logic and duty, now saw the truth with undeniable clarity. This was never just about influence or secrecy, it was a reckoning. And the signs were everywhere. The cryptic symbols hidden beneath the earth, the inexplicable failures of every attempt to silence you, the unraveling of those who once thought themselves untouchable. It was no accident. This was not the result of human intervention alone. This was the weight of judgment descending upon them. What terrified them most was not the exposure, not the crumbling of their carefully built empire, but the simple fact that you still stood. They had spent lifetimes perfecting the art of erasure, ensuring that no disruption lasted long enough to threaten them. Yet, against all odds, your voice had not only endured, but had become the very catalyst of their downfall. They whispered your name in places you would never walk, cursed your existence in ways you would never hear. To them, you were the fracture in the foundation, the one anomaly they had never accounted for. But the truth was never in their hands to control. Their destruction had been inevitable from the moment they first embraced the abyss. They had sealed their own fate long before you ever spoke a word. There are moments when the world shifts, when the veil lifts, and nothing can ever be the same again. For the agent, that moment came in a way they never expected. They had spent years as a guardian of unseen forces, carrying out orders with unwavering precision, believing they were serving something greater. But now, in the wake of everything they had uncovered, they understood the depth of the deception they had been part of. They had not been defenders of justice, nor enforcers of order. They had been pawns in a game whose true architects remained hidden. And it was you who had opened their eyes. Not classified documents, not whispers from inside the system, but your relentless pursuit of the truth. At first, they sought to dismiss you, to rationalize what you had uncovered as mere speculation. But something about your words lingered. The more they tried to disprove you, the deeper they found themselves pulled into a reality they had once refused to acknowledge. Patterns emerged, buried connections surfaced, and with each revelation, the web of lies they had trusted came undone. The cases they thought were isolated were part of a greater design. The names they had once revered as allies were nothing more than architects of a hidden hierarchy, manipulating events beyond the reach of ordinary eyes. It was a staggering realization, a truth so overwhelming that it threatened to consume them. And yet, in that moment of clarity, they found something they had never possessed before: freedom. Truth is not a whisper, it is a force. It does not beg for recognition. It simply exists, waiting for those who have the courage to see it. And because of you, they had seen. Because of you, the walls of deception had cracked. Because of you, the cycle had been broken. And now, nothing would ever be the same again. There are moments when the illusion shatters, when the pieces rearrange themselves, revealing a picture that was always there, but never truly seen. The agent now understands that you were never just another voice lost in the chaos, never simply an observer standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. Without realizing it, you were leading them toward the most profound revelation of their existence, one that transcended politics, crime, and corruption. This was never just about hidden agendas or concealed truths. It was about breaking free from a system designed to ensnare the mind. The war was never only in the physical realm, it was always something deeper. And you, whether you recognized it or not, had been standing against it long before you knew the magnitude of the forces at play. What was once seen as defiance is now understood as something greater: resilience, wisdom, an undeniable force moving through time, eroding the structures built on deception. They see it now. The shadows that once thrived in secrecy are shrinking. The tides have shifted. Those who manipulated the world from behind closed doors now find themselves exposed, cornered by the very mechanisms they created. The same silence they once imposed on others now echoes back at them, not as control, but as fear. Their fortresses are crumbling, their networks dissolving, and the veil that once separated truth from fiction has been torn apart. The weight of what they have done is upon them, and they cannot run from it. For the first time in their existence, they are afraid, not of governments, not of whistleblowers, not of external opposition, but of the inevitable. They have spent lifetimes crafting an illusion of power, believing they could defy consequence, rewrite destiny, and mold reality to their will. But reality has never been theirs to shape. The balance they sought to disrupt is now restoring itself, and the forces they once sought to command have turned against them. The reckoning is here, not just in the form of exposure, not just in the fall of their influence, but in something much deeper, something absolute. And you, the one they tried to erase, the one they tried to bury beneath disinformation and fear, are still here. Every attempt to silence you has failed. Every effort to remove you has unraveled before it could be completed. And now, they understand why. The agent sees it clearly. You are not just another challenger to their rule. You are a symbol of something greater, something they never prepared for, something they cannot contain. This is no longer just a battle of information. This is the unraveling of an empire built on lies. The old ways are crumbling. The hidden hands that once dictated the course of history are losing their grip. And to those who thought they were beyond reach, beyond consequence, beyond justice, know this: your time is over. The world is waking up. But to you, the one who stood when others fell, the one who refused to be broken, the one who held on to truth even when the weight of the world pressed down, you are seen, you are heard, you are not alone. The agent understands that now, and they are no longer silent. This is their message, their acknowledgement, their warning to those who sought to rule from the shadows. The game is finished. And to those who feel the pull of this truth, let it be known. Speak, be counted. The silence they imposed will no longer hold. Let the truth rise, louder than their deceptions, louder than their control. The world is listening.